So I figured this week, Parshas Vayishlach we start, and most of the parsha deals with Yaakov Avinu's encounter with his brother Esav. And we typically don't think about it this way, but I think where we have in many other portions of the Torah, we might ask, what's the point of this section? Right? There's a lot going on in this week's parsha that we would, I think, intuitively feel that there must be something going on here. But we have to think at a certain point, and the Ramban addresses this, is that the whole event of this story is that it's a non-event. That Yaakov and Esav, they meet, and there's an expectation of perhaps a confrontation, but it doesn't happen. They each go on their own separate ways, and really there's nothing of consequence at the end, it would seem. And so therefore a person could ask, although we wouldn't maybe come with this question as much as we would maybe at the end of the parsha, where we start talking about the genealogies of Esav, or many other sections of the Torah that seem to be superfluous. But with this section itself, the Ramban does point out that there's nothing essentially that comes out of this with regards to Jewish history in terms of the, at first glance at least, with what happens to future generations of Klal Yisrael. That when we go down to Egypt, everything that happens in this story doesn't affect us at all. It's a non-story, but the Ramban says that there's very much a purpose to what we're about to learn, and so that with that he has an introductory comment before he even gets into the psukim. He says in the first source, he says, "Nechtava parsha hazos lahodia ki hitzil hakadosh baruch hu es abdo." So this parsha in the Torah was written to make known to us that God saved His servant Yaakov. V'galu miyad chazak mimenu. It's a pasuk from Yirmiyahu. We know that from Mariv, that God redeemed Yaakov from somebody who was stronger than he. Vayishlach malach v'yaksilayim, and that an angel was sent, and Yaakov was saved. And so the first thing that the Ramban says the purpose of this parsha is that this is meant to teach us chasdei Hashem. If we just even had in a very simple form that Yaakov met up with Esav, everybody was on good terms, and then they each went their separate ways, so we wouldn't get the idea, the message given across that there was a tremendous chesed of Hashem, that everything worked out in the end. That there was, in fact, at some point in the story, Esav had designs to kill Yaakov Avinu, and that this was a dangerous situation, that we have the whole story in full to communicate the chasdei Hashem. So that's one reason. We also learn from this that Yaakov Avinu, he didn't just rely on his own righteousness, which he certainly had, but that he also made efforts to save himself with all of his ability. That he did hishtadlus. He despite having a moon on the one hand, while also doing everything that he could from his own perspective to make sure that he could be saved. That itself is a lesson of instruction. We're supposed to learn from these from our avos, from the stories that they do that take place with them. And the idea of putting in hishtadlus, of making efforts to ensure success, is something that's definitely a Jewish value. In conjunction with emunah and bitachon, we also need to have hishtadlus. V'yesh ba'od remez adoros ki kol asher yira la'avinu im Esav achiv yera lanu tamid im b'nei Esav. And then what we've mentioned in many weeks beforehand, the idea of ma'aseh avos siman labanim, that this is going to allude, everything in this story is going to allude to events that are going to happen to Yaakov and his children from the hands of Esav, from Edom, which is understood to be Rome, which is understood to be the current galus, the current exile that we're in. We typically understand that the Jews are in the galus of Edom, of Rome, of the Christian empire, so to speak. So the Ramban is telling us that what we're seeing here is going to be alluding to many of the events that are going to take place during that longest galus that we're currently facing. So, and it's very much fitting for us to grasp in the ways of this righteous person, Yaakov, that we ourselves should take grasp of, to whatever extent we can, the three-pronged approach that Yaakov himself had. This is something that Rashi famously alludes to. That there's three approaches here. Yaakov Avinu prayed. He also supplied gifts and basically diplomacy towards Esav, and also making himself ready for a war, to either flee or to escape. And our rabbis, the Rabbi Chazal in Midrashim, they themselves they spell out many of these ramazim, these allusions that take place in this story, as we're going to mention. So I thought with what we're going to go through in the remaining sections of the Ramban, I wanted to single out specifically the situations where the Ramban feels in this particular storyline we have a lot of Ma'is Avos Siman Labanim, where we have the allusions of what's going to be happening to the Jewish people from what we see in this story. So we start with El Esav Achiv Artza Seir, that Yaakov Avinu sent messengers towards his brother Esav in the land of Seir. So the Ramban says, Ba'avur hayos Negev Eretz Yisrael al Yedei Edom, Ba'aviv Yoshe Be'eretz HaNegev. On account of the fact that Yaakov Avinu, he was going towards the southern part of Eretz Yisrael, and Edom, Esav's land, was right alongside that. Yishol la'abor derech Edom o karov misham. Yaakov, to get to his father, was going to have to pass through a route that would be very close to Esav's territory. Akin pakad ulai yishma Esav. So Yaakov Avinu was worried that maybe Esav is going to hear that he's in the neighborhood. V'hiktim l'shloach elav malachim la'artzo. So therefore Yaakov tried to do a preemptive approach of diplomacy, sending messengers over to Esav. And we seem to be picking many different portions of the Ramban in the weeks that we've done so far, where the Ramban takes our Avos to task. But this is one of those situations. He says that the rabbis, Chazal, they already grabbed Yaakov concerning this. They criticized what he had done. Amru Bereshis Rabbah. The Chazal say in the Midrash, Bereshis Rabbah, Maksik Ba'oznei Kelev. It's quoting a pasuk from Mishlei that it's like one that grabs a dog by the ears. If in English, I think you have the continuation of the pasuk. Is he that passeth by and meddleth with a strife not his own? Getting involved in a mess, in a situation that you don't really need to get into. Amar lo HaKadosh Baruch Hu, God says to him, L'darko hayu mahalech, you're going on your way. Esav's going on his way. And you go over and you come and tell him, this is what your brother Yaakov says. Like, why do you have to make yourself known to Esav? Why do you do that? HaKadosh Baruch Hu apparently thought that Yaakov was incorrect in taking the initiative here. And the Ramban, he goes at length to say, what is the Siman Labanim in this situation? It says, it seems to me, it seems that with us, we too are going to our fall to Edom, to becoming subjugated under the rulership of Rome. That the way it started is Kimalachi Bayesheni Ba'u B'Bris Im Haromian. There's a little bit of a Hanukkah idea coming up, or post Hanukkah idea at least. That the kings of the time of the Second Temple period, they forged a covenant with Rome. If you look in the Hebrew, they have in parentheses there Sefer HaChashmonaim. It's known as the Book of Maccabees. So Mehem Shabo Baroma. There are even those from among the Jewish people, those leaders that even went to Rome themselves. Okay, that's written in Vayikra. And this itself was the reason for the Jews' downfall to Rome eventually. This is mentioned by the works of our rabbis. It's Gemara and Avodah Zarah actually. And it's also in other books. In parentheses, they have it in the Hebrew Yosifun, the Hebrew version of Josephus. That the Ramban points out that our taking the initiative in getting buddy-buddy with other nations of the world, that's what caused our downfall. If you look in this book of Maccabees, it says things more at length. The book of Maccabees is at least Maccabees 1 is considered to be basically our one of our primary sources for the Hanukkah story. It's an apocryphal work. It's not part of Tanakh, but we don't have anything in Tanakh that really discusses the Hanukkah story and everything, the historical events that were taking place around that whole situation. But if you look there, I didn't have enough room in the sheet to actually put it in. I wanted to save that room for the Ramban. But if you look there, it talks about how after Yehuda Maccabee and the rest of the family succeeded against the Greeks, there was also a partnership with Rome. Rome was the other big power at the time, and they had felt that being friendly with them was something that would give them more leverage and keep the Greeks away, and or at least keep the Greeks from oppressing them as much. And in the short run, it did work out. It did help to some extent. Although then we have the Hanukkah story, and eventually, after the Jews beat the Greeks, and we were under the we were still allies with Rome. Eventually, Roman rulership over the entire world at that time began to have its influence on us. That the fact that we were allies that allowed them to make entryways into the Jewish government, and eventually caused our downfall and the destruction of the Second Temple. So that's one Ma'is Avos Siman Labanim. Ramban says happens here, and a word of advice the Ramban's giving us is apparently where there's no trouble to begin with, it's not a good idea. The Ramban says to initiate in having an alliance with other nations of the world. It's not interesting. I don't know to what extent these things would apply to us nowadays. It's that's for speculation and to think about. But that's Ramban's first piece of advice, and he's also showing us how it's a precursor to what takes place to the Jewish people in the future. So that's one instance. So we have the next one. If you have in Lamed Bey's Pasuk Tes, the next entry for the Ramban, he says, "Vaya hamachanim hanishar lefleita." Right, this is the part of the story where Yaakov, before encountering Esav, he decides to split his camp into two different parts. Right, he figures that way he'll be able to save at least half of them. Right, so the Ramban explains al derech hapshat, from the simple meaning of this pasuk, Amar zeh be'ulai. It seems that this is being said in a manner of perhaps. When Yaakov says, and then perhaps the other encampment that I'm splitting with will be able to remain. So ki amar ulai natzal hamachaneh ha'echad. Perhaps one of these camps will be able to be spared. Ki b'hakoso ha'echad yivrichu ha'achirim. Because let's say Esav decides to attack one group, the other one will manage to flee during that time. O tashuv chamaso. Or perhaps even Esav's anger will be totally abated at that point. After having, gotten it all out towards one of the groups, he won't bother attacking the other. O tabo lahem atzala me'es Hashem. Or perhaps the other camp will somehow get saved by Hashem, while the other one won't. So those are the possibilities that Yaakov was coming from when he wanted to split up his encampment. V'chein amar Bereshis Rabbah. Chazal also say here, commenting on this, a little bit of a financial advice from this story. Limadatecha Torah derech eretz. The Torah is teaching us proper, conduct. Lo yaniach adam kol mamono b'zavis echas. A person should not leave all of his money in one corner. Don't invest all your money with one investor. He might end up being a fraud. Don't spread your wealth in different areas, so that way, at least if some part of it is lost, the other one will manage to remain. So that's a little bit of financial advice from the Ramban. But he then goes on to talk about what this is a remez to. This also alludes to the fact that despite whatever decrees that are going to come upon us, the Jewish people, through the hands of Esav, to destroy us, that it's true, they will be able to do certain amounts of evil to us in various lands that we live in. That perhaps one king in a certain land will make decrees that'll attack us with regards to either our pockets, that it'll drain our financial abilities to do things, or it'll even attack us personally. It'll result in deaths of Jews. But there'll be at the same time another king in another land who will have Rahmanas, will have pity on the Jews of those people, and the rest of the Jewish people will be saved thereby. Again, this is what Chazal allude to. In the Midrash, they say, Im yavo Esav el hamachaneh ha'achas v'hikahu. That, quoting that part of the pasuk, that perhaps Esav will come towards one camp and strike at them. Elu achinu shebedarim. That's referring to our brothers, the brothers of Klal Yisrael that are living in the south. Vaya hamachaneh hanishar lefleita. Quoting the other part of the pasuk, then the other encampment will be, it will remain. Elu achinu shebagola. That's referring to the Jews that are in exile, that aren't living in Eretz Yisrael currently. That's what Chazal were saying at the time of the Mishnah. So we see also in future generations, this too is alluding to certain episodes that are taking place in our lives. The Ramban himself is actually very much experiencing this at this time. It's important to realize that he lived in the 1200s, that this was a time where the Ramban himself was enjoying relative safety and comfort in Spain. And at the same time, there were Jews that were in Germany, that were in France, like the Balei Atosvos, that were known to be living their lives, and all their writings in Torah were done through tremendous pressure, because there were constant pogroms, crusades, whatever it was that was taking place at that time. That this is exactly what the Ramban is saying. That there will be times where one group of the Jewish people will be under attack, that they're going to be going through tough times, tough situations. While at the same time, Hashem has a Rahmanos, which is alluded to by this story, is that there will be Jews in another place that will be relatively safe and sound. And through that, the Jewish people will be able to continue. So that's another remez that the Ramban brings with regards to this parsha. So one more we have in the next source on the next side of the page, the Ruach Tasimu Bein Eder. That Yaakov, when he was presenting his gift to Lavan of flocks of various animals and other kinds of presents, that he left space in between each one. So Ramban says, "Kadela hasbia eno shel oso harasha." It was meant to satisfy the covetous eye of that particular evil person, of Esau, l'stavohu al hadoron, so that he should be satisfied by this present. He spread it out a little bit, makes it look a little bigger. So that was the Ramban's. That was Yaakov's intent. The Svaru Bereshis Rabbah, the Chazal again in Bereshis Rabbah say that this alludes to something. Sheish Bazer Remes. There's a hint here. Amar Yaakov V'nei HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Yaakov said before God, Ribono Shel Olam, God, Im Yiyu Tzaros Ba'os Al Banai, Lo Savi Yosan Zo Achar Zo. If various types of pain and troubles come upon my children, it shouldn't come one after the other. Ela Haruach Lahem Mitzaraseim. And give them a little space in between. Asa Remish Yu Hamasim Harnonios Shigbu B'nei Esav Mizaro Beruach Behefresh Bein Zulazu. This is a remiss to the fact that when apparently at that time also taxes and tremendous financial difficulties were placed upon the Jews by the government, it didn't come all in one blow. Apparently, it came piece by piece, enough that the Jews would survive. So there's a second idea of things being spaced out and helping for the general Jewish cause. Then on the one hand, we have geographically, we're in different areas where some are safer than others, and eventually, so that there's always somebody surviving among the Jewish people, and then also that the punishments we get, whatever tzaros we experience from the hands of Edom, they come in well spaced out with regards to time. That way we don't actually have to suffer everything all at once and in a way that we would perish. But these are all ways in which we, little by little, accept punishments for whatever it is that we do, while at the same time, Klal Yisrael doesn't get entirely destroyed. Okay, so that's one more remez of the Ramban. He has two more that I found in this week's parsha that I thought were interesting. So in this next section, the punctuation is a little bit off. I apologize. But in Lamed Beis Chafav, the Ramban says Vayar ki lo yachol lo. And this is with regards to Yaakov Avinu wrestling with the angel, with the which we know to be the Malach of Esav, right? The angel that represents Esav, that represents Edom, Esav's nation. So Ramban says Malach of Gibore Koach Osei Dvaro, that the angels, this is quoting a passage from Tehillim, they're great in strength, but nevertheless they do the words of Kadosh Baruch Hu. The Malachim, as powerful as they are, they're limited by God's own command. The Malachim can only do that which Hashem commands them. Therefore, the Malach wasn't able to actually prevail against Yaakov and damage him any further than he did. He was only given permission, this angel by God was only given permission to strike at Yaakov and to disjoint his thigh, to disjoint his leg, to hit him in the place where we know that we have the mitzvah of the Gid Anasha, not to eat that anymore because of this incident. So that was the only thing that the Malach actually had the right to do. And that's therefore the only thing he pulled off. Once that happened, Yaakov apparently started winning in the battle, and that was the end of that. So again, a comment of the Chachamim. The Ramban is, I don't think that, in many extents, when he says how it's a Maisa Avos Siman Labanim, I don't think he's really saying it from from his own, on his own, so to speak. It's something that's harder to do. It's to actually, look in the Torah and be able to predict, what's going to happen in the future. That's something that we would do with great trepidation. The Ramban is taking that route as well. He's only saying Maisa Avos Siman Labanim. He's only saying what this alludes to the extent that Chazal themselves have said it. If you look, pretty much everything here is the Ramban quoting Chazal in Bereshis Rabbah. So here he's doing it again. Nega b'chol hatzadikim she'asidin liyos mimenu. That this event, this touched upon the tzaddikim that were meant, that will eventually in the future be destined to come from Yaakov. Zed Dor Shel Shmad, and this is a reference to the generation of persecution. So v'ha'inyan ki ha'ma'or kulo remes l'dorosav she'iyah dor b'zaro shel Yaakov yiskaber Esav aleim ad she'iyah karov l'ka'kea b'yitziasan. This is referring to Chazal. They were referring to, when they said this, to their very own generation. In many ways, that's what gave the Chazal, in some of these situations, the ability to extrapolate and to say what was going to happen, because it was no longer predicting the future. It was them seeing in the Torah what was currently happening to them now. That the Ramban is saying this is Chazal, the sages of the times of the Mishnah, describing an event that even happened to themselves, where there was times where Esav and his nation managed to almost uproot the entire seed of Klal Yisrael. This is referring to one generation of the sages in the times of the Mishnah, Kedor shel Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava v'chavirav, like the generation of Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava and his colleagues. And we know this whole episode. Do we recognize who Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava was? Does anybody recognize that name? It comes up in both the Tisha B'Av davening and in the Yom Kippur davening. That might be a little bit of a giveaway. What do we say on those 2 days? There's one tefillah that we say, or not necessarily a tefillah, but I guess a historical record of something that happened to Klal Yisrael. We talked about the Asara Harugei Malchus, the 10 martyrs, so to speak. And historically, they didn't actually all happen all at the same time, in the same period. But the narrative of them is geared in a way where it's meant to, I guess, express the idea that this was all because of one incident, that this was all because of Klal Yisrael's sins, that it's almost put in a way where it seems like everything's happening all at once. But Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava was one of them. He's one of the sages in the times of the Mishnah. And Kamosha Amru, it's like what they say in Shir Hashirim. Amar Rabbi, the Medrash to Shir Hashirim Rabbah. Amar Rabbi Chia bar Abba. Rabbi Chia bar Abba said concerning that generation of persecution, which was before his time. If someone was to tell me to give up my life to sanctify God's name, I would give it up, right? That's something that we learn. We learn to, when the time calls for it, in the time of persecution, even when it's not one of the big three averos, so to speak. But if it's anything really, a person's supposed to give up their life in those situations to be mekadesh Shem Shemayim. But Rabbi Chia bar Abba says, nevertheless, I don't want to actually give up my life. This is interesting. He says, unless you would kill me immediately. Aval b'dorah shel shmad ini yachal lispal. At the times of the generation of persecution of these rabbis, I would not have been able to bear that. It's an interesting statement. I think the normative halacha is that if a person has to give up their life al kiddush Hashem, to whatever extent that might, whatever situation that might apply to, we typically assume, I think, that even if the person would have to face torture, also, a person would have to give up their life in those situations. It's an argument amongst the Rishonim, but I think mainstream opinion is that a person does have to be willing to give up their life. Whereas at the same time here, Rabbi Chia bar Abba is saying, if I would have had to go through that, I'm not so sure I would have been able to. But that's a tremendous demand. But Mahayu Osim B'dorah shel Shmad, what was done during this generation of persecution? What happened? Hayu Maviyin Kadurio shel Barzal, they would take these iron balls, Umalavdin Oso B'or, they would make them white hot through fire. But Nostan Oso Tachashchehen Umasiyan Ashosein man. They would apparently this was something that was very painful, a very torturous way to go. They would stick it in the armpits of the people that they were trying to kill. And Ramban says there have been generations where they've done things to us like this, or even worse than this. Yet nevertheless, we've managed to endure all this and get through it. And that itself is also alluded to in this parsha, where it says that after this whole episode with the Malach of Yaakov having this struggle, even though he got struck and even though he was injured and limping afterwards, he survived. He managed to come out of it shalim, in a complete and in peace. So that itself also is Ramban taking what Chazal alluded to, saying that this was referring to their own generation and pointing out that this happened in generations that we've experienced as well. While at the same time we've managed to come out of it. And Baruch Hashem, we've had through many instances in history where we've gone through very tough times, most recently the Holocaust. Yet nevertheless, the Jewish people have managed to survive in some way or form. And so that's also something that this episode is alluding to, the Ramban says. Then just the last one here. This one I thought was most interesting. This isn't so much the Ramban taking a Ma'aseh Avosim and Lavanim approach here, but it's almost a beautiful way to, like almost instruction of how to read these parshios. So he continues. He says, "Lama zeh ensachin beinei Adoni." This is the next parak in the Chumash. This is when Yaakov Avinu actually meets up with Esav, and Yaakov gives gifts, and then Esav says, "Here, let me, give my soldiers over to you to escort you to the place where my troops are going right now, and we'll meet up in Har Seir." And Yaakov says, "Why do I have to find favor in my master's eyes?" And so Rashi explains, or the Ramban paraphrasing Rashi says, "Lama zeh ta'aseh li tova she'eni tzarich." Yaakov Avinu responds to Esav with Esav offering his service of being an escort. He says, "What do I need this for? What do you have to do good for me?" Yaakov is saying, let me just find favor in your eyes, and you don't have to give me anything else in return. Take my gift, and you don't need to compensate for that. That's how Rashi explains Yaakov's statement to Esav. The Yaakov's intent here in refusing that favor was because he didn't want to have anything to do with Esav and his group. All the more so when you take into account, and this is something that the Mefarshim discuss, Yaakov never meets up with Esav after this incident. Right? They seem to be making a deal of, we'll meet at Har Seir. Esav goes ahead and with his troops are faster, and Yaakov says he has flocks and family to work with, that they're going to be going slower, but they never actually end up in Seir. And there's discussion there. So was Yaakov Avinu lying? Was he allowed to lie in that situation? But in any event, what's going on here is Yaakov for sure wasn't planning on actually going. And if he's not planning on going, for sure he doesn't want Esav and his troops to be serving as an escort. Most I think explain that this was coming from a concern that Esav was, despite the peaceful gestures he was making at that particular meeting, Yaakov wasn't sure how long that would last. So he wanted to really stay away from Esav as much as possible. But the Ramban quotes a very interesting Gemara here, or a Medrash. Our rabbis saw from this entire episode a manner of advice. Not just a Maisa Avos Siman Labanim of portending future events, but it actually serves as an instruction. It's meant for us to look at and to learn from. Amru, they say in Bereshis Rabbah, when Rabbi Yanai would go to the Malchus, when he would go to to the Romans in his time, to those kingdoms, for whatever reason, he had to request a favor or for whatever need the Jewish people had at that time, he would always, before he went, look at this particular parsha. He would read over this. He would look into it and study it well. And he would never have the Romans escort him back. After his meeting with the king, or whoever it was, he would make sure that he never had Roman escorts. Just like Yaakov Avinu here wouldn't have the escorts of Yaakov Avinu. Chadzman lo istakal. There was one time where Rabbi Yanai didn't have a chance to look at it. He didn't get a chance to look into this parsha. And he, after this meeting with the Romans, he allowed the Romans to escort him back towards Eretz Yisrael. And they didn't even reach Akko, and Rav Yanai found himself needing to sell his own coat, I guess, for money for bribery, I think Rabbi Shavel says in the translation. So things didn't go well. The one time that Rabbi Yanai didn't look in this for instruction, and he didn't take the advice, or he didn't follow in the ways of Yaakov Avinu. Rabbi Yanai knew to look in this parsha. He knew to look in this entire section because he saw that this was the parsha of Galus, so to speak. This was the Torah's portion that really addresses most head-on what the Jews are supposed to do in the exile. When he would go to Rome for whatever reason to request from the king various needs of the community, he would look into this parsha. He would want to see. He would want to look into the ways and the methods of his great grandfather Yaakov Avinu. He saw through that in future generations this was going to repeat itself. And typically, when Rabbi Yanai was successful in looking at this parsha and learning from it appropriately, he made sure that the Romans didn't escort him. Why? Because the Romans, specifically the Romans, I don't know if this is a statement about all of the Galios that the Jewish people lived through. The Romans, quoting a mission Avos, the Ramban says, they're all looking out for themselves, essentially, their own personal gain. And with regards to the money and property of others, they take liberties. They're not so careful. So Rabbi Yanai learns that, and the Mishnah Avos learns that as well from this story, apparently. Essentially, what the Ramban is telling us is, besides, I think, a major lesson here is the idea, like in a very specific way. We understand in general that we're supposed to be learning from the Torah, that we're supposed to be gaining life lessons from it. But this is one of those few situations, I think, where you see in the Torah, in the works of Chazal themselves, I guess a step-by-step how-to. You actually see Rabbi Yanai actually taking the Torah, and before he goes to go through a certain experience to have a certain challenge, he looked in and constantly tried to find messages that spoke to him personally as to how he should conduct himself. I thought that was very interesting. And the lesson that the Ramban is telling us that we should be learning from this whole incident is that at least with regards to Rome, and this is the Galus again that we're currently in. I think most assume that we are that those that live under the Christian nations of the world, that's considered Edom. That's the Galus we're in currently. There's, I think, a minority opinion even that says, perhaps more relevantly for nowadays, that it refers to the Arab peoples. But typically we assume it means Rome. Certainly the Ramban is taking it in that direction, and most of Chazal do as well. But his approach is that when dealing with these nations, we are skeptical. It's not to say that we're not friendly, that we're not cordial. Yaakov Avinu certainly was in this situation. He was very friendly to Esav, and he wanted to keep the peace as much as possible. But Yaakov Avinu, at the same time, like the Ramban said in his introduction, there's a three-pronged approach here. We have to always be on guard. We have to be prepared for anything. There's the diplomatic route of giving gifts and speaking nicely. Well, at the same time, there's the preparation for war, preparation for hostilities to increase, and most importantly, the third approach, which is tefillah, which is the praying to God for help, because He's the one that's really running the show here, and asking Him for guidance to know which approach is perhaps the most appropriate in a given time. Also it's interesting to note that when we have this three-pronged approach being done all at once, it's not Yaakov Avinu throughout the course of his life took different approaches in different situations. He was doing all three at once, and with regards to this meeting with Esav. So I think very often we have perhaps leanings towards taking one action over the other with regards to the Jewish people, particularly nowadays. Is it just the role of having just bitachon and davening, or is it should we try to play more of a conciliatory role, let's say in making peace, or should we be more of a hawk and maybe do battle with our enemies? So the answer is yes, yes, and yes. We have to really address all three approaches, and as the situation dictates, one approach will come out as being the way to go in a given situation, but to some extent they really all apply all at once. It seems like in this particular incident, Yaakov Avinu Baruch Hashem did not have to go to war, but it was very much because of his tefillah. So it was very much because of his taking the other approach of diplomacy, though it's not necessarily always going to work out that way. And with that I'll end, but I think there's much to be developed. If you're looking at this story, if you're looking at the story of Yaakov's meeting with Esav throughout, you can see so many hints to what happens to the Jewish people in history. What's happened in the past is much more easily done than what will happen in the future. But you see these things with regards to Yaakov Avinu. When does he come under attack from the Malach of Esav? Specifically when Vayivasa Yaakov Levado, when he's alone. Very much alludes, I think, to the fact that the Jewish people, in many instances, we're very much isolated. We talk a lot in these days in this world about the Jewish people being an isolated nation, of not necessarily having the most faithful friends in any part of the world. And that's something, that's a dangerous situation. It's something else to maybe learn from this parsha. Anybody else?
Before they were born. Even before they were born, it was like when they passed the church, Esau was stronger than the synagogue. It was like one, they can't both rule. When one is stronger, the other is weaker, and vice versa.
That was the original nevuah that was given to Rivka Imenu when she had Esav, when she was carrying Esav and Yaakov in her stomach. I forgot what the actual lashon is, but basically, Shnei Goyim bevitnech. There are two nations in your womb, right? That's already an acknowledgement of. It's we never think in these terms that we're gonna, when a person has children, they don't think, they're gonna be two different nations entirely. You like to think of the family being one big cohesive unit, but immediately there's this idea thrown out at Rivka that her children are going to represent two very different paths in life, two very different peoples, and that's something interesting as well.
I wanted to ask if you could clarify. So. God didn't want Yaakov to go to Esau. He wanted
from the comment that the Ramban quotes, it seems like Hashem did not want Yaakov to initiate that contact. That it's almost like getting yourself into trouble here.
But there are two brothers that were estranged from each other for all those years, and then he's like bordering on his property. And wouldn't it provoke Esau more to say, I haven't seen you all these years, and then you just think that you're so high and mighty that you just can go through?
That is where the Ramban talks. That's where Yaakov Avinu was coming from when he made that decision to do so. He felt that it was best to hedge his bets rather than risk trying to get through that area undetected. That perhaps just make your presence known already, but make it clear that you're there on a peaceful mission. That way that would minimize any damage. But Hashem. So according to the Midrash, it would seem so. It would seem that Hashem would have preferred that Yaakov had just gone straight without having gotten involved in this whole mess at all.
Don't approach your people with whom you have conflict
until you need to.
Until you need to, and maybe that's a lesson for today too.
I think at this point we're very much in contact. already, So it's that lesson maybe harder.
Maybe it wasn't the best district.
Mm-hmm. But I think in general the idea is that not to meddle in affairs that you don't need to until there's to some extent Yaakov Avinu's motivation of maybe trying to be diplomatic and jump the gun and try to get his hand involved in things to minimize the damage that could be caused later. The Ramban, quoting Chazal, seems to think that's not the approach that we should be taking. To whatever extent you could apply that to today's situation, I'm not sure. I think we're very much engaged in all these situations already. Mm-hmm.
So was Yaakov punished because of that?
I don't think the Midrash mentions any punishment, but Hashem wasn't happy about it. There must have been something for it. But okay, we'll end here.